All right, welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're diving into Persephone, the springtime goddess, flowers and sunshine and all that. And I'm really excited for this one because you've brought in so many different sources about her, mostly from Greek mythology. And to be honest, I don't think I know that much about Persephone beyond like that basic image.
Yeah, that's pretty common, actually. A lot of people only know that surface level Persephone, but I can assure you she's way more than just a pretty face. This deep dive is going to be fun. We'll uncover a much more complex figure, really fascinating than you might expect.
Okay, you've got my attention. Where do we even begin?
Well, I think her name is a great place to start. You see variations, right? Persephone, Persephonia, even Kure, all for the same goddess. And that suggests maybe some pre-Greek roots, adds a little mystery to her origins.
Oh, that's cool. So it's like her story is rooted in something even older than like the Greek myths we all know.
Exactly. And if you look at the possible meanings of her name, it gets even more interesting. One theory connects it to she who beats the ears of corn. So that suggests a connection to the harvest, right?
Hmm.
But there's also the folk etymology linking her to bringing or causing death. And that's a pretty stark contrast for someone usually pictured with all those, delicate blossoms.
Oh, yeah, it is. It's like she's holding both life and death, kind of. So is it safe to say she's more than just a symbol of spring?
Oh, way more. Yeah. Her name really sets the stage for a goddess who embodies duality. And that duality is even more apparent when you look at her titles and all her different functions, really. Persephone is not just a goddess of vegetation, she also rules the underworld, realm of the dead. She's what's called a chthonic goddess.
Chthonic, that definitely has, like, a darker vibe than vegetation goddess. A little spooky, maybe.
It does. Think about it. She's connected to like this world of blooming flowers,
Yeah.
all that vibrancy. But also she's connected to this shadowy realm beneath the earth. And it's reflected in her contrasting titles, I guess. Dread Persephone, Queen of the Underworld. But also Core, the maiden,
Yeah.
representing, springtime and new life.
So she's powerful then. This figure connected to both the, like, blossoming world and the underworld. How did she end up in charge of the realm of the dead, though? I always thought that was Hades' territory.
That brings us to one of the most famous Greek myths, the abduction of Persephone by Hades. You probably know the basic story, but there's some really interesting details that add a whole new level to the myth.
Okay, yeah, I'm all ears. Refresh my memory and then tell me what I'm missing.
All right, so the familiar version is Hades kidnaps Persephone, her mother Demeter. She's distraught, and Zeus eventually steps in to make a deal. But here's where it gets interesting. The location of this abduction, it changes depending on who's telling the story. We see Sicily, Crete, Boeotia, even near Athens.
Really? Why so many different places? You'd think something that important would have one setting.
Well, that's the thing about myths. They're not historical accounts. They evolve over time, so it's not about finding the exact spot on a map. It's more about the idea of crossing over, venturing into this unknown realm.
Okay, so it's symbolic. More about the journey. But what about the pomegranate seeds? I remember those being important.
Oh, absolutely. They're not just a random snack. Hades tricks Persephone into eating a few, and that act binds her to the underworld. Eating food from that realm, that was a huge taboo, creates a permanent connection.
So those seeds were like a magical contract, tying her to Hades in the underworld. And that's why she has to split her time, right? Winter when she's with Hades, spring when she comes back to her mother.
That's the traditional interpretation, explaining the change of seasons. But the myth is about so much more than just the weather. It reflects like those really deep anxieties about life and death, the pain of separation and the joy of reunion, the power of nature's cycles. I mean, these are themes that resonate across time, regardless of where or when you live.
That makes sense. The pomegranate seeds, though, those can also be interpreted in different ways too, right? I vaguely remember something about them being about, like, the loss of virginity, transitioning to womanhood.
You're right. Scholars, people like Bruce Lincoln, they propose these alternative interpretations, connecting the pomegranate to those social transitions that young women in ancient Greece faced. It's a reminder that myths can be viewed through all these different lenses. They can reflect so many aspects of human experience.
Okay, so the pomegranate seeds, they're kind of like the myth itself,
Ugh.
full of different layers of meaning. But so far we've been talking about this one big story, the abduction. Is there more to Persephone's mythology, or is that pretty much it?
Oh, there's so much more. We've barely scratched the surface, ready to go deeper into her world, beyond just the abduction.
Absolutely, I'm hooked. This complex and powerful Persephone is really interesting. What else can you tell me about her?
Well, she has a big role in the Orphic religion. It's this mystical tradition with a unique take on the Greek gods. They saw Persephone not just as this queen of the underworld, but as the mother of Dionysus.
Wait, Dionysus, the god of wine and parties. I thought he was Zeus's son.
That's the most common version, yeah. But the Orphics, they had their own take. They believe Dionysus was actually born from Zeus and Persephone, so that makes her the mother of this major god, adds a whole new dimension to her.
Okay, so her family tree is a little complicated. There's definitely a lot more to Persephone than I realized. What other stories feature our queen of duality?
Well, there's the story of Adonis. He was a beautiful mortal, and he caught the eye of not one, but two powerful goddesses. Aphrodite, obviously, goddess of love and beauty, and, well, you guessed it, Persephone.
Oh, so a love triangle with two goddesses. That's got to be good.
It is. Some versions of the myth say that both of them were totally smitten with Adonis, which of course led to some divine rivalry. Eventually, Zeus had to intervene, like he always does, and made a deal. Adonis split his time between the two.
Wow. So not just a queen of the underworld, but also a goddess caught in a love triangle. Persephone's story just keeps getting better.
Right. And this story actually shows another side of her agency. She's not just going along with fate. She has desires, she takes action, and she can even be jealous, just like the rest of us.
That's really interesting. I'm starting to see her in a totally different light. Not just the springtime goddess, but this complex, multifaceted figure. But is there a side to her that goes beyond desire, even jealousy? Does she ever use her power in a more assertive way?
Oh, absolutely. She's known for her beauty, and grace, but she's definitely capable of wrath. And she knows how to use her power to protect herself. Take the myth of Minth, for instance. She was a nymph who, well, she made the mistake of catching Hades' attention.
Uh-oh. That sounds like trouble. What happened?
Well, let's just say Persephone wasn't too thrilled about the situation. And Minth, well, she learned a valuable lesson about not messing with the queen of the underworld.
Yikes. Don't make the queen angry. But, this story shows a different side of her, too. We're seeing that darker side, her capacity for anger, for jealousy. It's human.
Exactly, and it challenges that common perception of her as this passive, innocent maiden. This story really showcases her power, and not just as the ruler of a realm, but her power to act, to protect what she considers hers. It adds yet another layer of complexity to her character, and it reminds us that even goddesses can experience all those very human emotions.
This deep dive is really changing how I see Persephone. She's not just a springtime symbol, is she?
Definitely not. And we haven't even touched on some of the most interesting parts of her story.
Oh, I can't wait. This is getting good. What else can we learn about her?
Let's look at some myths where Persephone shows compassion, where she uses her influence to help others, even in the underworld. One of the best examples is the story of Orpheus and Eurydice.
Oh, yeah. The musician, right?
Yeah.
He tries to bring his wife back from the dead. That's a heartbreaking one. What does Persephone have to do with it?
Oh, she plays a major role. Remember, she's not just Hades' wife. She has her own power. In the myth, Orpheus's music, it moves her so much that she convinces Hades to grant his request, to let Eurydice come back to the world of the living.
So she's a force for good then, in this story at least. Second chances and all that.
Yeah.
That's a big contrast to the wrathful goddess from that last story.
It is, and it really shows that she's not just reacting to things, she's capable of acting on her own, being compassionate, and even challenging Hades when she's moved to do so.
I'm seeing a pattern here. Every time we think we've got Persephone figured out, a new layer appears.
That's what I love about her. And there are other examples too, like the story of Sisyphus, who actually tricks Persephone into letting him escape death, at least for a little while. The fact that he was able to manipulate her, even briefly, it just shows how much authority she has in the underworld.
So she's powerful, but she can be persuaded. She's a mix of strength and maybe vulnerability. But we've been so focused on these specific myths. I'm curious about how she was actually worshipped in ancient Greece.
Yeah.
Like what were her cults like?
That's a great question. It's time to shift focus a little from the mythical realm to the realm of ancient belief, how people actually practice their religion. And the worship of Persephone, it's a fascinating window into how the Greeks viewed her dual nature.
Okay, I'm ready for ancient rituals. Did they honor her more as a springtime goddess or more for her connection to death?
They actually embraced both sides of her. There were these mysterious private cults dedicated to Persephone, but there were also these big public festivals celebrating her. It just goes to show how many different ways people connected with her.
Secret cults, A&D public festivals. Tell me everything.
Okay, one of the most intriguing rituals was called the Thesmophoria. It was a women-only festival with secret rites focused on fertility and marriage. Just imagine secret rituals, women gathering to celebrate their connection to this, powerful goddess. Pretty far from the image of Persephone as that passive maiden, huh?
A secret women-only fertility festival for Persephone. That definitely adds to the mystery.
It does, and it's a reminder that her association with life, it's not just about pretty flowers, it's about agriculture, the creation of new life, and really the power women held in these ancient societies. But there were also more public ways of honoring her, like the Eleusinian Mysteries, one of the most famous religious practices in ancient
Oh,
Greece.
yeah. The Eleusinian mysteries. I know Demeter was a big part of those.
Hmm.
What about Persephone?
Oh, she was central to the Eleusinian Mysteries. They were really connected to agrarian cults, the whole cycle of planting and harvesting. And while the specifics of what they did were secret, we know that they promised a better afterlife. Which, if you think about it, that concept wasn't even present in the early versions of these beliefs.
So agriculture, the afterlife.
Yeah.
It sounds like her dual nature was everywhere in her worship.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it wasn't just in mainland Greece either. If we go over to southern Italy, we find these amazing artifacts. Locrian Pinacase, they're these terracotta tablets with like these beautifully painted scenes, and a lot of them show Persephone. But here's the twist. In a lot of these images, she's portrayed as this protector of marriage and childbirth.
Really, a protector of marriage and childbirth. That's so different from her connection to death in the underworld.
It is, but it just goes to show how diverse her worship was. Different cultures, different communities, they emphasize different aspects of her character, her powers, all of it.
Wow. Okay, this is impressive. We started with a pretty simple idea, the flower maiden. And now I'm seeing this powerful goddess with connections to death and grain and secret rituals and marriage and even the afterlife. It's a lot to take in.
It is, isn't it? And we're just getting started.
I can't wait for part 2. I'm ready to see where we go next in this deep dive.
Get ready, because we're about to explore how Persephone's story goes beyond the ancient world and see how it still connects with us today.
Wow, part 1 was really eye-opening. Persephone is so much more multifaceted than I thought. We went through all those myths, her different roles, even ancient rituals. I was really struck by how different cultures focused on such different parts of her.
It's true, and that cross-cultural influence is really important for understanding how she's had such a lasting impact. It's not just about like what the ancient Greece thought, it's how her story has traveled and changed over time.
So where do we go from here, beyond ancient Greece? Where did her story go?
Well, the Romans, for example, they had their own version of Persephone.
Proserpina. I was wondering about that. Did they just copy the Greek myth, or did they add their own stuff?
They definitely took the main parts, connecting Proserpina with spring A and D, the underworld. But they also linked her to their goddess Libera, who was all about agriculture. And, interestingly, freedom.
Freedom.
Hmm.
That's not a word I'd usually associate with Persephone, especially with that whole abduction thing.
Yeah, it is a bit subtle, but I think it shows something really interesting about her power. It's like she's not just trapped in the underworld. She's a force for bringing new life forth, even from darkness.
I like that. It's like she holds the key to both worlds. Definitely power in that. Is there anything else about the Roman Proserpina that stands out?
Well, some Roman art actually portrays Proserpina as this like powerful queen ruling beside Pluto, the Roman Hades. So it's a shift from, kidnapped maiden to a woman who shares power in the underworld.
It's like they're recognizing her power, not just as a goddess, but as a woman, too. I'm starting to notice something. Every time I think we've figured Persephone out, there's another layer.
You got it. And it's not just about how different cultures saw her either. There's this one image that keeps coming back, even in the Roman version, the pomegranate.
It's true. Wherever Persephone's story goes, the pomegranate's right there with her. Why do you think that image has been so powerful for so long?
The pomegranate is it's so symbolic. It's packed with seeds, right? So that represents abundance, fertility, but it also has that deep red juice. Makes you think of lifeblood, but also staining, marking something like a transition. It perfectly captures that duality, life and death, those cycles of growth and decay that Persephone is all about.
It's like that fruit became the visual symbol for everything she represents.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the Greeks, the Romans. What about beyond the ancient world? Did she just fade away, or did her story, like, have a lasting impact?
Oh, Persephone's story has had quite the afterlife, actually. You see her influence everywhere: art, literature, music, even modern psychology. She's been inspiring people for centuries.
Wow, that's amazing. What is it about her that keeps captivating people, do you think?
Well, I think it comes down to her story tapping into these universal themes, love, loss, the power of nature, the mysteries of life and death, the big stuff that humans have always thought about.
Makes sense that those themes would resonate across different cultures and time periods. But why Persephone specifically? Why not, like, Zeus or Hera?
It's her dual nature, I think. It makes her really compelling. She's both light and darkness, beauty and power, vulnerable but also resilient. All of that complexity makes her relatable, even though she's a goddess. It's like she's holding a mirror up to, our own struggles, our own contradictions.
She's not just this distant figure in a myth. She's reflecting something about, like, what it means to be human.
Exactly. And her journey, especially that whole descent into the underworld, it's been interpreted in some really interesting ways. Carl Jung, for example, the psychologist, he actually saw it as a metaphor for the journey into the unconscious mind.
Really, Jung and Persephone. That's a connection I never would have made.
Think about it. Going down into the underworld, facing your shadow self, your fears, your desires. It's like exploring those hidden parts of yourself, right? And just like Persephone comes back to the surface every spring, renewed and transformed, we can emerge from those psychological depths with a better understanding of ourselves.
That's a really powerful image.
Yeah.
So the abduction isn't just about kidnapping. It's about this internal journey we all have to make, facing the darkness inside us to become whole.
Exactly. And that Jungian interpretation is just one example of how Persephone's myth is still being reinterpreted, reimagined even, which keeps it relevant, even for a modern audience.
Speaking of modern interpretations, I've noticed this huge surge in interest in Persephone lately, especially online.
Yeah.
And in books, too. What's behind that, do you think?
I think there are a couple things going on. First, there's this trend of like going back to mythology, looking for meaning, wisdom in these ancient stories. And within that, Persephone seems to be really striking a chord, especially with women.
Why do you think that is?
Well, she's the strong figure who like embraces both her light and her darkness, her vulnerability and her strength. And that resonates with a lot of people, especially in a world where, women are often told to be one or the other.
It's like she's saying it's okay to be complex, to be more than just a stereotype.
Exactly. And a lot of modern stories about Persephone, they're going beyond the traditional narrative. They're exploring themes of consent, agency, and female empowerment.
It's like she's breaking free from the old myth and reclaiming her own story. I love that.
It's powerful, right? Taking a story that's thousands of years old and making it speak to a whole new generation.
It really is. It's amazing to think that a myth this old can still be so relevant. I'm starting to see why you find Persephone so interesting.
She is pretty captivating, isn't she? And it just goes to show that, mythology isn't just about these old stories. It's a living thing, constantly evolving, reflecting our own changing views of the world.
So we've gone from ancient Greece to Rome, from Renaissance art to modern psychology to all these contemporary retellings. Persephone's story has had a huge impact. Is there anything else we need to cover?
There's always more to explore with Persephone. But before we wrap up, I think it's really important to talk about her symbolism, what she represents.
Okay, yeah. Symbolism. We already talked about the pomegranate, but what other symbols are connected to Persephone?
Well, there's the obvious ones: flowers, seeds, representing growth, renewal. But there are some less obvious ones too. Torches, for example, they represent both light and darkness, like illuminating those hidden places. And of course, there are the animals associated with her.
Animals. That's interesting. What kind of animals make you think of Persephone?
The most common one is the deer.
A deer. I guess I associate those with, like, gentleness, grace, not really the underworld.
It might seem a little strange at first, but the deer actually has a lot of symbolic meaning. It represents innocence, vulnerability, but also the wildness of nature, that constant cycle of life, death, and rebirth. I mean, think about it. Deer shed their antlers and regrow them every year. It's this powerful image of renewal, just like Persephone's journey.
I see it now. They both represent this delicate balance, a fragile kind of strength. What about other animals? Are there any that are a bit more underworldy.
Oh, definitely. Snakes are often connected to Persephone.
Okay, now that makes more sense.
Right. Snakes symbolize transformation,
Hmm.
shedding skin, revealing something new underneath. They represent the earth, those hidden mysteries. They go perfectly with Persephone's connection to the underworld.
So we have flowers and seeds for life and growth, torches for lighting up the darkness, deer for that delicate strength, and snakes for transformation, the mysteries of the underworld. It's like every symbol adds another layer of meaning to her story.
Exactly. They enrich the narrative and they invite us to look deeper, to understand the symbolic language in these myths. It's about realizing that every detail, every image can have so many meanings.
This is a lot to think about. We've covered so much, from ancient Greece to modern psychology, from literal interpretations to all this symbolism.
Mm.
I have to say, this deep dive has totally changed how I see Persephone.
That's what we were hoping for. But before we move on to our final part, there's one big question we need to address.
All right, hit me with it. What's the question?
Why should you care about Persephone? What does a Greek goddess from thousands of years ago have to do with you today?
That's a really good question. To be honest, I was so caught up in all the details of Persephone's story that I didn't even think about, like, the why. What can we take away from all this?
Yeah.
Why should a Greek goddess from so long ago matter to us now?
It's easy to get lost in the myths themselves, all the symbols, the cool stories, but they're more than just like ancient entertainment. They give us insights into being human, into the questions we're still asking today. Right.
Okay, yeah, I'm with you. So what are those insights? How does Persephone's story connect with us now?
Well, look at her dual nature. Persephone is a queen of both worlds, the world of growth and then the underworld. She's both light and darkness, life and death. That acceptance is a powerful message.
You mean finding balance, accepting the good and the bad?
Exactly. We all have light and shadow inside us. It's about recognizing those parts, putting them together, and becoming whole.
That's a great way to put it. It's so much better than pretending we're all perfect all the time.
Right. And Persephone embodies that so well. She doesn't hide from the darkness, try to deny it. She embraces it, even rules it. That's a pretty big lesson.
Like she's showing us it's okay to be afraid of the tough stuff. It's part of us.
I think so.
Mm.
And beyond the personal, Persephone's story also gives us a way to look at our relationship with nature.
Yeah, her connection to the seasons is a powerful reminder of how nature works. Those cycles of death and rebirth were part of that.
Exactly. And a lot of times we try to control nature, bend it to our will. But Persephone's story reminds us we're part of those rhythms.
It's humbling, realizing we're not really in charge, just along for the ride.
It is. And embracing that, feeling like we belong to something bigger than ourselves, that's so important. For us, A&D, for the planet.
It's making me rethink a lot of things.
That's the power of myth, right. And one last thing. Remember those other ways of looking at the abduction myth? The ones that connect it to losing innocence and all the transitions we go through?
Yes, those were really interesting.
Well, those interpretations are still important today. Life is always changing. We lose things. We have to grow and adapt.
It's like the abduction. It's not just about a kidnapping. It's about all those changes we experience in life.
Exactly. And just like Persephone learns to be queen of the underworld, we can find strength when things change.
Yeah, this has been amazing. I started out thinking Persephone was just this goddess of flowers, but now I see her so differently. She's about duality, accepting the whole human experience. She connects us to nature, those cycles of life and death, and she's a symbol of resilience when things are hard.
That's a great way to put it. And remember, this is just the start of your exploration. There's so much more out there to discover.
You've definitely made me curious. I already have some books in mind.
That's what I like to hear. And as you keep learning, ask yourself, what does Persephone's story mean to you? How does it connect to your life?
I love that. It's like a personal challenge to keep digging deeper and finding more layers of meaning.
Exactly. Persephone's myth is an invitation to explore, to look deeper into the mysteries of life, death, all of it.
Well, you've given us a lot to think about. Thank you so much for guiding us through this deep dive into Persephone.
It was my pleasure. And to everyone listening, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep discovering.
Beautifully said. Until next time, happy diving. Tell us what you think about this episode. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.